A millionaire wife arrives unannounced at lunchtime and can't believe what she sees. Elizabeth Montgomery, CEO of Montgomery Financial Group, worth $47 million, came home early to surprise her husband, Timothy, what she found in their five-bedroom estate in Buckhead. Atlanta would shatter everything she thought she knew about her 12-year marriage. This isn't a story about infidelity. It's about something far more devastating. The slow, silent erosion of a man's dignity, and the moment when truth finally breaks through the surface like a drowning man clears throat, gasping for air. Viewers, have you ever discovered something that completely changed how you saw someone you loved? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me tell you why I do this. Every week, I bring you real stories about real people facing moments that change everything. Moments of betrayal, triumph, justice, and transformation. These aren't just stories for entertainment. They're mirrors that reflect our own relationships, our own choices, the quiet compromises we make, and the courage it takes to stop making them. I tell these stories because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that they're not alone in their struggle, that choosing yourself isn't selfish, and that truth always finds its way to the surface. These stories matter because your story matters. Now here's something that might surprise you. Over 70% of people watching this video right now haven't subscribed to this channel. Think about that. You're here because you're drawn to these stories because something in them resonates with you, yet you're watching from the outside looking in. I want you to be part of this community, not just a visitor but a member. So right now, hit that subscribe button. It takes 1 second, then drop a like on this video. And here's the part I really want you to do. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. California, Texas, Georgia, Australia, Manchester, Netherlands, somewhere else entirely. I read every single comment. And there's something powerful about knowing we're all connected across cities, countries, continents, united by these stories that remind us we're human. Do it now. Subscribe, like, comment. Let's build this community together. The morning of Tuesday, September 17th, 2024, started like any other for Elizabeth Montgomery. Her alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. in their Buckhead Clears Throat estate, a sprawling property with tall windows that overlooked manicured gardens and a fountain Timothy had installed years ago when he still made decisions about their home. She didn't hear it. The fountain, that is. She barely noticed anything about the house anymore except whether it was clean, whether it impressed the clients and business associates who occasionally visited for dinner parties she orchestrated with military precision. Elizabeth slid out of bed without waking Timothy. He was still asleep or pretending to be. She'd stopped trying to figure out which. In the bathroom, she went through her routine. Shower, skin care, hair pulled into a sleek low bun, makeup applied with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Charcoal suit, cream blouse, heels that added 3 into her 57 frame. By 6:15 she looked exactly like what she was, a woman who commanded rooms and closed deals worth millions. Timothy's toiletries sat untouched on his side of the counter, the same spot they'd occupied for 12 years. She didn't look at them. In the kitchen, she made coffee. 1 cup black, no sugar. The espresso machine hissed and sputtered, breaking the silence of the house. Through the window above the sink, she could see the gardens beginning to catch the early morning light. Roses Timothy had planted when they first bought the house. He used to tend them himself. Now, a landscaping crew came every Thursday. She grabbed her leather briefcase, her keys, her phone. Timothy appeared in the doorway wearing an old Howard University t-shirt and flannel pants. His hair was flattened on one side, eyes still heavy with sleep. "Morning," he said quietly. His voice was soft, almost tentative, the way it had become over the years. "Morning," she replied, scrolling through emails on her phone. "I was thinking I could make dinner tonight. Maybe that jerk chicken you used to love. I found your grandmother's recipe and I have a client dinner." She didn't look up. The milestone group could run late. Oh, he nodded. "Okay, maybe tomorrow then. Maybe." She slipped her phone into her pocket, finally meeting his eyes for a brief second. "Don't forget the recycling goes out today." "I won't. And the cleaners are coming at 10:00. Make sure you're dressed." Something flickered across his face. Hurt, maybe, or resignation. "I will." She walked past him toward the garage, heels clicking against the marble floor. Timothy watched her go, his hand still resting on the doorframe, the same spot where he'd kissed her goodbye every morning for the first 8 years of their marriage. That ritual had ended so gradually, neither of them had noticed when it stopped. The garage door hummed open. Her black Mercedes S-Class gleamed under the overhead lights. She slid into the driver's seat, pressed the ignition, and backed out into the quiet street. She didn't look at the house in the rearview mirror. By 6:45, she was on I-85 heading toward her office in Midtown Atlanta, already on her first conference call of the day. Timothy stood in the kitchen for a long time after she left. The coffee pot sat on the warmer, half full. She'd made enough for two, like always, but never poured him a cup. He did that himself, adding cream and 2 sugars, stirring slowly while looking out at the garden. A cardinal landed on the edge of the fountain. He watched it dip its head, shake its wings, then fly away. He'd been an architect once, a good one. He designed 3 buildings in downtown Atlanta before they got married, had a small firm with 2 partners, a steady stream of clients who appreciated his eye for blending modern design with historical preservation. Elizabeth had been a rising star at a boutique investment firm when they met at a gallery opening in 2012. She'd walked right up to him, pointed at a painting, and asked if he thought the artist was brilliant or pretentious. Brilliant, he'd said, but also pretentious. She'd laughed, really laughed, and he'd fallen in love with that sound. They got married 14 months later, small ceremony. Her parents hadn't approved. His mother had cried happy tears. For the first few years, they'd been partners. She'd build her career, he'd build his. They'd meet in the middle, exhausted and exhilarated, comparing war stories over wine on their balcony. Then Elizabeth's firm went public. Her stock options made her a millionaire overnight. Suddenly, there were opportunities, bigger clients, board positions, speaking engagements. She needed to focus, she said, just for a little while, just until things stabilized. Timothy had supported her. Of course he had. That's what partners did. He'd taken on more at home. Handled the contractors when they renovated, planned their vacations, made sure her dry cleaning was picked up. Small things, temporary things, except they weren't temporary. 1 year became 2, 2 became 5. His firm struggled without his full attention. His partners bought him out. He told himself it was fine. Elizabeth was thriving. They didn't need 2 incomes. He could freelance, consult, take time to figure out what he really wanted to do. But what he'd really done was disappear. Not physically. Physically, he was always there in the house, in the background, waiting. He'd become the person who made sure there was milk in the fridge and gas in her car. The person who confirmed reservations and signed for packages. The person Elizabeth stopped seeing somewhere around year 7, even though he was standing right in front of her. Now, at 41 years old, Timothy Montgomery spent his days in a house that felt like a museum. Beautiful, expensive, empty. He finished his coffee, rinsed the cup, and placed it in the dishwasher. The cleaners would be there at 10:00. He needed to shower and get dressed, as Elizabeth had reminded him, as if he were a child who needed instructions. At her office, Elizabeth moved through her morning with the precision of a surgeon. Conference call with the acquisition team at 8. Strategic planning meeting at 9:30. Lunch meeting with the CFO at noon. Her assistant Vanessa, a sharp 26-year-old with an MBA from Emory, kept everything running smoothly. Coffee appeared when needed. Documents were prepared. Calls were screened. By 11:45, Elizabeth was reviewing quarterly reports when Vanessa knocked on her door. The lunch meeting with David just got moved. She said his flight from New York got delayed. He's asking to reschedule for tomorrow. Elizabeth glanced at her calendar. Tomorrow's packed. If he can do Thursday, already suggested it. He confirmed Thursday at 1. Good. Elizabeth turned back to her screen, then paused. Actually, that clears my afternoon, doesn't it, pretty much? You have that Zoom call at 3:00, but I can move it. No need. Elizabeth sat back, a rare opening in her schedule stretching before her like an unexpected gift. I think I'll head home early. Get some actual rest for once. Vanessa's eyebrows rose slightly. You rest. Should I call a doctor? Elizabeth smiled thinly. Don't get used to it. She packed her briefcase, told Vanessa to forward anything urgent to her cell, and took the elevator down to the parking garage. By 12:15, she was driving north on I-85, the opposite direction from her usual evening commute. Traffic was light. The sun was high and bright. She felt something she hadn't felt in months, spontaneous. Maybe she'd surprise Timothy. Maybe they could have lunch together. When was the last time they'd done that? She couldn't remember. Maybe they could talk, really talk, not about recycling and dry cleaning, but about actual things about them, about whether there was still a them underneath all the silence and routine. She took the exit toward Buckhead, winding through the tree-lined streets. She barely noticed any more. Their neighborhood was quiet at midday. Most of her neighbors were at work. The ones who weren't were probably at the club or the spa. She pulled into her driveway at 12:32. Timothy's car was there, an older Honda Accord he'd bought used 3 years ago when his old car died. She'd offered to buy him something nicer, something more fitting for their lifestyle, but he'd refused, said he didn't need it, said the Honda was fine. She grabbed her briefcase and walked to the front door, keys in hand. The house was quiet when she stepped inside. No music, no television, just silence and the faint hum of the air conditioning. "Timothy," she called out. No answer. She set her briefcase on the hall table, slipped off her heels. Her stocking feet were silent on the marble floor. Timothy, still nothing. She walked toward the kitchen, expecting to find him there. The kitchen was empty, clean. The dishwasher door was slightly ajar, dishes inside neatly arranged. A note was stuck to the refrigerator in Timothy's handwriting. "Recycling out. Cleaners came. Leftovers from Sunday in the fridge if you're hungry." Elizabeth stood there reading the note twice. Something about it made her chest feel tight. The careful consideration, the thoughtfulness, the assumption that he wouldn't be there when she read it. She pushed the feeling away and walked toward the living room. Empty the den, empty. His office empty, though his laptop sat open on the desk, screen dark. Then she heard it. A voice, faint but clear, coming from upstairs. She froze, listening. It was Timothy's voice, talking to someone. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was animated, engaged, happy. Elizabeth's pulse quickened. She moved toward the stairs, each step silent and deliberate. The voice grew clearer as she climbed. It was definitely Timothy, and he was laughing, actually laughing. A sound she hadn't heard in so long it felt foreign. She reached the top of the stairs. The voice was coming from the guest bedroom at the end of the hall. The door was half open, afternoon sunlight spilling into the hallway. Elizabeth moved closer, her heart pounding now, her mind racing through possibilities she didn't want to name. She reached the doorway and looked inside. What she saw stopped her cold. Timothy sat at a desk positioned by the window facing a large monitor. He wore headphones, his back to the door, completely absorbed in whatever was on the screen. The room had been transformed. The guest bed was gone. In its place were two long tables covered in equipment, monitors, a keyboard, a microphone on an adjustable arm, ring lights, a camera. The walls were lined with soundproofing foam panels. Sketches and architectural drawings were pinned to a corkboard. A small bookshelf held architecture books, photography manuals, and equipment she didn't recognize. Timothy was talking into the microphone, his voice warm and enthusiastic. So the key thing about adaptive reuse is respecting the bones of the original structure while giving it new life. Like this warehouse conversion we're looking at. See how they kept the exposed brick in the original timber beams. That's not just aesthetic. That's honoring the building's history. Elizabeth stood frozen in the doorway, trying to process what she was seeing. On the monitor, she could see what looked like a video editing program. Thumbnails of videos lined the side of the screen. Clear's throat, titles like The Hidden Architecture of Atlanta, How Historic Buildings Get a Second Life, Why This Abandoned Factory Became a $1 Million Loft. Timothy continued talking, his hands moving expressively. "A lot of people ask me how I got into this, and honestly, it started as just a way to stay connected to architecture after I stepped back from my firm. I'd drive around Atlanta, see these incredible buildings that were forgotten or underused, and I'd think about their potential. So I started documenting them, taking photos, researching their histories. And then I thought, why not share this?" He clicked something on the screen, and Elizabeth could see analytics numbers, big numbers. Subscribers 487,000, talent views 23.4 million, revenue 14,827 this month. Elizabeth's hand went to her mouth. Timothy laughed at something someone had written in what looked like a live chat. Yeah, Marcus, you're right. That's exactly what makes the Pond City market conversion so special. They didn't try to hide what it was, they celebrated it. She took a step back, her heel catching on the doorframe. The slight thud made Timothy turn. He froze when he saw her, his expression cycling through surprise, confusion, and something else. Not guilt, not fear, something closer to resignation. He pulled off his headphones, muted his microphone, and turned his chair to face her. "Elizabeth," he said quietly. "You're home early." She couldn't find words. Her eyes swept the room again, taking in every detail she'd missed in her first shocked observation. The professional-grade equipment, the carefully organized space, the evidence of hours, days, months of work she'd known nothing about. "What is this?" she finally managed. Timothy stood rubbing the back of his neck. "It's my studio. I've been creating content, videos about architecture, urban development, historic preservation. Your studio." She repeated the words like they were in a foreign language. "How long?" "3 years, give or take, 3 years." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You've been doing this for 3 years and you never told me. I tried to at first, but you were always busy, always in meetings, always." He stopped himself. "It doesn't matter." I just kept going. Elizabeth walked into the room, her eyes landing on the monitor, the numbers, the comments streaming in from people watching him live. People who knew this version of Timothy, this engaged, passionate, articulate version she'd forgotten existed. "You have almost 500,000 subscribers," she said, more to herself than to him. 487,000. Yeah, Timothy's voice was quiet, factual. "It started small, just me and a camera talking about buildings I loved. But people responded. They wanted to learn. They wanted to see the city differently, so I kept making videos. And this," she pointed at the revenue number on the screen. "You're making money from this. Some enough ad revenue, sponsorships, a few consulting gigs that came through the channel. I have a Patreon too, people who want to support the work." Elizabeth felt her legs weaken. She cleared her throat, sat down in the only other chair in the room, a simple office chair pushed against the wall. "How much?" Timothy hesitated. "Elizabeth, I don't think how much, Timothy. Last year about $160,000. This year's on track for maybe 200. The number hit her like a physical blow. $200,000. He'd been making $200,000 doing work she didn't even know about. In a room in their house she barely remembered existed while she'd been treating him like what? A house husband, a personal assistant, someone who needed to be reminded to get dressed before the cleaners came. "Why didn't you tell me?" Voice cracked. "Why didn't you say something?" Timothy looked at her for a long moment. "When would I have told you, Elizabeth? At breakfast when you're on your phone answering emails, at dinner when you're not there, in bed before you fall asleep reading reports. When exactly should I have scheduled this conversation?" The words delivered without anger or bitterness, just stated fact, cut deeper than any accusation. Elizabeth felt tears pressing at the corners of her eyes. "That's not fair," she said weakly. "Isn't it?" Timothy sat back down, his eyes steady on hers. "When was the last time you asked me what I was doing with my day? Not whether I'd handled some errand or chore, but what I was actually doing, what I was thinking about, what mattered to me." Elizabeth opened her mouth, then closed it. She couldn't remember. The silence between them filled the room like flood water on the monitor behind Timothy. Comments continued to scroll. "Where'd Tim go? Hope everything's okay. We'll wait. Take your time, man." "You have people waiting," Elizabeth said, nodding toward the screen. "They'll understand." Timothy didn't turn around. "This is more important, is it?" She heard the bitterness in her own voice and hated it. "Because it seems like you built an entire career, an entire life I knew nothing about." "No," Timothy's voice was firm. "I built a life you didn't care to know about. There's a difference." "That's not." She stopped because wasn't it true? How many times had Timothy tried to talk to her about his day, his thoughts, his ideas, and she'd been too distracted, too tired, too focused on her own world to really listen? How many times had she made him feel like his contributions to their life, to their home, weren't real work because they didn't come with a title and a paycheck? Except now they did come with a paycheck, a substantial one. And she'd had no idea. "I thought you'd stopped working," she said quietly. "I thought you were just managing the house." "I was managing the house. I still am." Timothy's voice softened slightly. But I'm also still an architect, Elizabeth. That didn't go away just because I wasn't in an office. I needed something that was mine. Something that reminded me I was more than the person who makes sure your life runs smoothly. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through every assumption Elizabeth had made about their marriage, about Timothy, about herself. She looked around the room again at the care he'd taken in creating this space, the professionalism of the setup, the evidence of dedication and passion and work ethic she'd somehow convinced herself he'd lost. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Timothy, I'm so sorry." He didn't respond immediately. On the screen, someone had written, "Tim, if you need to go, just let us know. We're here whenever you're ready." Timothy reached over and typed a quick message. "Hey everyone," something came up. "Going to end the stream here. See you Thursday. Thanks for being here." Then he ended the broadcast. The sudden silence in the room was deafening. How did I not know? Elizabeth said more to herself than to him. How did I not see this? Because you stopped looking. Timothy stood and walked to the window, his back to her. Not just at this, at me. Somewhere along the way, I became invisible to you. The person who keeps things running, background noise. Elizabeth felt tears spill over onto her cheeks. She'd built her entire identity around being observant, strategic, detail-oriented. Those qualities had made her a successful CEO, but somehow she'd failed to notice that her husband had disappeared from their marriage, not because he'd left, but because she'd stopped seeing him. "I don't know how to fix this," she said quietly. Timothy turned, his expression unreadable. "Do you want to?" The question hung in the air between them. Did she? Elizabeth thought about the life they'd been living. The separate orbits, the transactional conversations, the loneliness she'd been too busy to acknowledge. Then she thought about the man in front of her, the one who'd built something meaningful while she wasn't watching, who'd kept their home running while pursuing his own passion, who'd stayed even as she'd pushed him further and further into the margins of her life. "Yes," she said, "if it's not too late." Timothy was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "I don't know if it is or not." The honesty of the answer hurt more than a definitive no would have. Elizabeth stood, her legs unsteady. "I should let you work. I'm done for today." He gestured toward the monitor. That was my only scheduled stream. They stood there in the transformed guest room. Two people who'd shared a life for 12 years, suddenly strangers in their own home. Elizabeth didn't know what to say, how to bridge the distance that felt like miles even though they were only feet apart. "The jerk chicken," she said suddenly. "Tonight, if you still want to make it, I don't actually have a client dinner." Timothy's eyebrows rose slightly. "You lied. I didn't want to commit to being home on time." She felt shame wash over her as she said it out loud. "That's what I've become. Someone who lies to avoid spending time with my own husband." Another silence. Then Timothy said, Okay, I'll make dinner. You should be home by 7. I will. I promise." Elizabeth turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. "Those people, your subscribers, they really care about what you have to say." Timothy nodded. "They do. I used to be one of those people at the gallery when we met. I asked what you thought and I actually listened to the answer. I remember. I want to be that person again." Timothy didn't respond. Elizabeth left the room. Walking back downstairs in a daze, she passed the note on the refrigerator, the one about leftovers and recycling. She pulled it down, folded it carefully, and put it in her pocket. Then she sat at the kitchen table in the middle of the afternoon in her expensive suit in her expensive house, and cried for the marriage she'd nearly lost without even noticing it was dying. Elizabeth didn't go back to the office. She texted Vanessa that she was taking the rest of the day, something she hadn't done in 3 years. She changed out of her suit into jeans and a simple blouse, clothes that felt foreign on a Tuesday afternoon. Then she did something she hadn't done in longer than she could remember. She sat on the couch in their living room and simply existed in her own home. The house revealed itself to her in ways it hadn't in years. She noticed things. The way afternoon light came through the western windows, casting geometric patterns on the hardwood floor. The fresh flowers on the entry table changed weekly. She'd always assumed they just appeared, but of course, someone was buying them, arranging them. Timothy, the throw pillows on the couch were new, or at least new to her awareness. Cream with subtle navy stripes. They matched the curtains perfectly. Timothy's eyes, she realized, his aesthetic sense bringing beauty into a space she moved through without seeing. She heard him moving around upstairs, the creak of floorboards, the sound of a door closing. She wondered what he was thinking, whether he regretted her seeing his studio, his secret world, whether he was relieved or resentful. She didn't know, and the not knowing made her feel like she was meeting him for the first time. Around 3:00, Timothy came downstairs. He changed into jeans and a gray Henley, his feet bare. He paused when he saw her on the couch, clearly surprised she was still there. "I thought you'd go back to work," he said. "I thought I would too." Elizabeth set down her phone, which she'd been checking compulsively out of habit, not necessity, but I didn't. He nodded, then walked to the kitchen. She heard the refrigerator open, the sound of him moving things around. A few minutes later, he came back with 2 glasses of iced tea, offering her one. "Thank you," she said, taking it. The glass was cold against her palm. Timothy sat in the armchair across from her, not beside her on the couch. The distance felt intentional. They sipped their tea in silence for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" Elizabeth said. "Okay, why didn't you fight harder? To make me see? To make me listen?" Timothy looked down at his glass. "Because after a while I stopped believing you wanted to, and I didn't want to become someone who had to beg for his wife's attention." The words cut cleanly. Elizabeth felt her throat tighten. "That's what I made you feel like you had to do. It's what we both did. I let myself fade into the background. You let me. We're both responsible, but I was the one who..." Elizabeth stopped. "Who? What? Made you feel invisible? Who treated our marriage like another item on my to-do list? Who forgot that you're not just the person who manages my life, but the person I chose to build a life with?" Timothy met her eyes. "Yeah, all of that." They sat in the honesty of it. No defensiveness, no justifications, just the truth hanging between them like laundry on a line. "Tell me about your channel," Elizabeth said. "Please, I want to know." Timothy studied her face as if trying to determine whether she meant it. Then he started talking. He told her about the first video he'd made, shaky footage on his phone of an abandoned textile mill in West Midtown. How he'd posted it not expecting anyone to watch, but someone did. Then 10 people, then 100. How comments started coming in from architecture students, from people who'd worked in that mill decades ago, from urban planners and preservationists, and people who just loved Atlanta and wanted to understand it better. He told her about learning video editing at night after she'd gone to bed, and about investing in equipment slowly, carefully using money from the small consulting jobs he'd picked up about the moment his channel hit a 100,000 subscribers. And he'd sat in that room upstairs and cried because he'd built something that mattered, something that was his. "I started getting invited to speak," he said, "at Georgia Tech's architecture school, at Preservation Society meetings. People wanted my perspective on development projects. I consulted on 2 historic renovation projects last year, one in Inman Park, one in Dakar. The developers found me through my channel." Elizabeth listened, watching his face animate in ways she'd forgotten it could. This was the man she'd fallen in love with, passionate, articulate, alive with ideas. He'd been here the whole time. She just stopped looking. "Why architecture content?" she asked. "You could have done anything because it's who I am." Timothy's voice was quiet but firm. "When I stepped back from my firm, I didn't stop being an architect. I just stopped practicing in a traditional way. But buildings, spaces, design, that's how I see the world, that's my language. I couldn't walk away from it completely." "You shouldn't have had to," Elizabeth said. "I should have." "Don't." Timothy shook his head. "We can't redo the past, Elizabeth. We can only decide what happens next." "What do you want to happen next?" He was quiet for a long time. "Honestly, I don't know. 3 hours ago, I was living in a marriage where my wife didn't know I existed. Now she's sitting here asking me about my work. I don't know what this is. It's me trying," Elizabeth said. "Maybe poorly, maybe too late, but trying. Why now? Why today?" Timothy's question was fair. Elizabeth thought about it, about the moment she'd stood in that doorway and seen not just the studio, but the entirety of what she'd failed to see for years. The life Timothy had built in the margins she'd left him, the person he'd remained while she'd forgotten to notice. "Because I saw you," she said finally. "Really saw you, and I realized I'd been looking at an empty chair for years, thinking you'd left it when actually I was the one who'd stopped sitting down." Upstairs, a notification chimed from Timothy's computer. He glanced toward the ceiling. "That'll be comments from the stream, people asking if I'm okay." "Are you okay?" I don't know. Timothy set his glass on the coffee table. I've been not okay for a long time, Elizabeth, but I've also been okay. I found purpose, community, work that matters. I built a life within our life. I just didn't know if there was room for both. There should be. There has to be. Elizabeth leaned forward. Timothy, I'm not going to sit here and promise everything will be perfect. I'm still going to be ambitious. I'm still going to work hard. That's who I am, but I can't keep being who I've been. Someone who only sees her own reflection in every room. Someone who treats the person she loves like staff. What are you saying? I'm saying I want to rebuild this us, but I don't know how to do it without your help. Timothy looked at her for a long moment. His phone buzzed on the arm of his chair. He ignored it. You'd have to actually be here, he said. Not just physically, actually present. I know. You'd have to ask questions, listen to answers, care about the parts of my life that don't directly affect yours. I know you'd have to let me be more than the person who makes your life easier. Elizabeth felt tears building again. I know and I want to. Timothy, I want to know who you've become, who you've been becoming. While I wasn't paying attention, he didn't respond right away. Outside, a car passed on the street. The fountain in the garden burbled softly. A sound Elizabeth had forgotten was there. Timothy Snort stood and walked to the window, looking out at the roses he'd planted a decade ago. I was going to leave, he said quietly. Elizabeth's heart stopped. What? Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. I've been thinking about it for 6 months. The channel's doing well enough that I could afford a place. Not like this, but enough. I was going to wait until after the holidays. Didn't want to ruin Thanksgiving, Christmas, but I was planning my exit. Why didn't you? Timothy turned from the window. Because I kept hoping you'd see me again. Kept thinking maybe one day you'd walk through that door and really look at me and we'd find our way back to each other. I know that sounds pathetic. It doesn't. Elizabeth stood, crossing to where he stood. It sounds like love, real love. The kind that waits even when it shouldn't have to. They stood facing each other by the window, afternoon light washing over them both. Elizabeth raised her hand, hesitated, then gently touched his face. He didn't pull away, but he didn't lean into it either. The gesture hung between them, uncertain. I'm scared, she admitted, that I've broken this too badly, that there's too much distance to close. Me too, Timothy said, but I'm more scared of not trying. Elizabeth let her hand drop. So we try. Yeah, Timothy's voice was rough. We try. The alarm on Elizabeth's phone went off. Her 300 meeting, the one Vanessa had offered to move. She silenced it without looking at it. Timothy noticed. You have somewhere you need to be. No. Elizabeth held his gaze. I'm exactly where I need to be. Something shifted in his expression. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the possibility of it. Okay, tell me what to do. Elizabeth said, tell me how to do this. Just be here for dinner. That's enough for today. She nodded. 700. I'll be here. Timothy gave a slight smile. It wasn't the smile she remembered from their early years, full and unguarded, but it was a start. Elizabeth went back to the couch. Timothy returned to the kitchen and she heard him begin preparing dinner. The sound of cabinet doors running water, the click of the stove igniting. Domestic sounds that had formed the backdrop of her life for 12 years without her really hearing them. Now she listened to each one. She picked up her phone. 47 unread emails. 3 missed calls, messages from Vanessa asking about various decisions that needed to be made. Elizabeth looked at them all, then set the phone face down on the coffee table. They could wait, not forever, but for tonight, for this moment of trying to find her way back to her marriage. At 6:30, Elizabeth went upstairs and showered. She put on the soft gray sweater Timothy had given her last Christmas, still in her closet with the tags on. It fit perfectly. She came back downstairs to find the dining room table set. Not the formal china they used for business dinners, but the simple pottery they'd bought together at a craft fair in Savannah during their 2nd year of marriage. Candles lit, music playing softly, jazz, the kind Timothy loved. The jerk chicken sat on a platter, perfectly seasoned, the aroma filling the house, rice and peas, plantains, a salad with mango and avocado. He'd made everything from scratch. Elizabeth stood in the doorway, overwhelmed. When did you have time to do all this? I've been cooking all afternoon. Timothy pulled out her chair. While you were sitting in the living room, I was in here trying to figure out if this was real or if you'd disappear again. I'm not going to disappear. They sat down. Timothy served the food. The movements practiced and careful. Elizabeth took a bite of the jerk chicken and closed her eyes. It tasted exactly like she remembered from her grandmother's kitchen, from Sunday dinners when she was young and life was simpler. "This is perfect," she said. "Your grandmother was a good teacher. I kept a recipe." They ate slowly. Elizabeth asked questions about his channel, about the projects he was consulting on, about the community he'd built online. Timothy answered cautiously at first, then with more openness. As the evening wore on, he showed her comments on his phone from people whose lives had been changed by his videos. A young woman who decided to study architecture after watching his series on historic preservation. A man who'd used Timothy's videos to convince his city council to save a landmark building. "You're making a real impact," Elizabeth said. Timothy shrugged. "It's what I always wanted to do. Help people see the value in what's around them. Make them care about the spaces they inhabit." Elizabeth thought about her own work, the deals she closed, the portfolios she managed. It was important. It was meaningful. But when was the last time someone had written to her saying her work had changed their life? When had she helped someone see value in anything beyond a balance sheet? "I'm proud of you," she said. "I should have said that years ago. I should have been saying it all along." Timothy met her eyes. "Thank you." After dinner, they cleaned up together. Elizabeth washed while Timothy dried, a rhythm they'd had once and had somehow lost. They didn't talk much, but the silence felt different than it had that morning. Less empty, more full of possibility. When the kitchen was clean, Timothy checked his phone. "I have some editing to do for Thursday's video. Can I watch?" Elizabeth asked. "I mean, if that's okay, I don't want to intrude." Timothy looked surprised. "You want to? I want to understand what you do." They went upstairs to his studio. Elizabeth sat in the second chair while Timothy pulled up the editing software. For the next hour, she watched him work. The way he trimmed clips, adjusted audio levels, color-corrected footage of a beautiful old church in Sweet Auburn. His focus was complete, his skills evident in every decision he made. "You're really good at this," Elizabeth said. "I've had a lot of practice." Timothy glanced at her. "You're not bored, not even a little." He smiled. The real smile this time, the one she remembered. When he finished the rough cut, it was after 10:00. They went back downstairs, both suddenly aware of what came next. Bedtime. The question of whether they'd share the bedroom or whether Elizabeth would take the guest room or whether Timothy would offer to sleep on the couch. "I'm going to head to bed," Elizabeth said. "Long day." "Yeah." Timothy hesitated. "I'll be up in a bit." She nodded and went upstairs alone. In their bedroom, she got ready for bed, brushed her teeth, washed her face. When she climbed under the covers, she wasn't sure if Timothy would join her. She lay there in the dark, listening to the house settle. 20 minutes later, the door opened quietly. Timothy came in, moving in the dark to his side of the bed. He got in, careful not to touch her, maintaining space between them. They lay there, two people in a king-sized bed, miles apart despite inches. "Timothy," Elizabeth said into the darkness. "Yeah, thank you for dinner, for letting me watch you work, for still being here." He was quiet for a moment then. "Thanks for seeing me again." Elizabeth felt tears slip silently down her temples onto her pillow. She didn't reach for him. She didn't close the distance. Not yet. That would take time. Trust. Proof that today wasn't an anomaly but the beginning of something different. But she fell asleep that night, less alone than she'd felt in years, knowing that in the morning they'd try again. The next morning, Elizabeth's alarm went off at 5:30. She lay there for a moment, oriented herself, then reached over and turned it off. Beside her, Timothy stirred slightly but didn't wake. She looked at him in the dim pre-dawn light. Really looked at him, the gray threading through his hair at the temples, the lines around his eyes that came from smiling, from squinting at screens, from years she'd missed while looking elsewhere. He looked peaceful, younger somehow, even with the signs of aging. She slipped out of bed quietly and went through her morning routine, but slower this time, more deliberately. In the kitchen, she made coffee, 2 cups. She poured cream and 2 sugars into one, left the other black. When Timothy came downstairs 20 minutes later, wearing his old Howard shirt and looking surprised to see her still home, she handed him his cup. "Made it how you like it," she said. He took it, clearly uncertain how to respond. "Thank you." They sat at the kitchen table together, something they hadn't done in years. The silence wasn't comfortable yet, but it wasn't hostile either. Just two people learning how to be in the same space again. "I was thinking," Elizabeth said, cradling her own cup. What if I worked from home today? I mean, if that's okay, I have calls I can take here. Vanessa can handle the office. Timothy looked at her carefully. You don't have to do that, I know, but I want to. If it doesn't mess up your schedule, I'm editing today and I have a call with a potential sponsor at 2. Otherwise, I'm free. Then I'll stay. Elizabeth felt nervous saying it like she was asking permission to be in her own home. Is that weird? Me being here during the day? Timothy considered this maybe at first, but we can figure it out. They worked in different parts of the house that day. Elizabeth sat up at the dining room table with her laptop, taking video calls and responding to emails. Timothy worked in his studio, editing footage and preparing for his sponsor call. They moved around each other carefully like dancers learning new choreography. At noon, Timothy came downstairs. I'm making lunch. You hungry? Elizabeth looked up from her screen, startled by the interruption, then consciously chose to set her work aside. Yeah, I am. He made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, simple comfort food. Clear's throat, they ate together at the kitchen counter, and Elizabeth asked him about his editing. He explained the project, showed her rough cuts on his phone, asked her opinion on which intro worked better. She gave thoughtful feedback. He listened. They were communicating, actually communicating, and it felt fragile but real. Over the next 2 weeks, Elizabeth came home early 3 more times, unannounced at first, testing whether Timothy's world would still be there or whether she'd imagined it. Each time she found him working. Once he was on a video call with an architecture professor from Clemson discussing a collaborative project. Once he was photographing salvage materials from a demolished building for an upcoming video. Once he was simply researching, surrounded by books and making notes. She started watching his videos late at night after work. She'd pull them up on her iPad and watch them with headphones while Timothy slept beside her. She learned about flying buttresses and adaptive reuse, and the difference between restoration and renovation. She heard the passion in his voice, saw the care he took in framing each shot, understood why nearly 500,000 people had chosen to follow his work. One evening, 2 weeks after she discovered his studio, Elizabeth came home to find Timothy being interviewed by a local news crew in their living room. She stood in the doorway unnoticed and watched him talk about his upcoming documentary series on Atlanta's vanishing mid-century modern architecture. He was articulate, confident, completely in his element. The reporter clearly respected him, asked intelligent questions, treated him like the expert he was. When they finished and the crew started packing up, Timothy saw her. He looked worried, like maybe she'd be angry about the intrusion, about the disruption to their pristine home. But Elizabeth walked over and waited until the reporter approached. "That's my husband," Elizabeth said to the reporter, unable to keep the pride from her voice. The reporter smiled. "You must be very proud. He's doing incredible work." "I am," Elizabeth said, meeting Timothy's eyes. "I really am." After the crew left, Timothy turned to her. "I should have asked if it was okay to have them here. This is your home too, Timothy. You don't need permission to exist in it." Something in his expression softened. Old hurt beginning to heal. That weekend, Timothy had a speaking engagement at the Atlanta Preservation Center. He'd mentioned it casually, not expecting Elizabeth to be interested. But Saturday morning, she appeared in the kitchen dressed and ready. "What time do we need to leave?" she asked. "I'm coming if that's okay." Timothy blinked, clearly surprised. "You want to come to a lecture on preservation architecture? I want to see you speak." They drove to the event together. Elizabeth sat in the audience of about 80 people, architects and students and preservation enthusiasts, and watched her husband command the room. He spoke for 45 minutes about the importance of preserving Atlanta's architectural heritage, using examples from his videos, showing before and after photos of buildings saved and lost. People laughed at his jokes. They leaned forward during his serious points. They asked thoughtful questions afterwards. During the Q&A, a young black woman, maybe 25, stood up. "Mr. Sewell, I just want to say your channel changed my life. I was working in marketing, miserable, and I started watching your videos. They reminded me that I'd wanted to be an architect since I was 8. I quit my job, went back to school, and I'm graduating with my March next spring. Thank you for showing me it wasn't too late." Timothy's voice was thick when he responded. "That's not me. That's you. I just helped you remember who you already were." Elizabeth watched this exchange with tears in her eyes. This was impact. Real, measurable, life-changing impact, and she'd almost missed knowing this version of her husband existed. Afterwards, people crowded around Timothy. Elizabeth hung back, watching him interact with students, answer questions, accept business cards. A woman about Elizabeth's age approached her. "You're Elizabeth Montgomery, aren't you, from Montgomery Financial Group?" Elizabeth tensed, ready for the usual small talk about markets and investments. "Yes, that's me." The woman smiled. "I'm here with my son. He's in the architecture program at Georgia Tech. He watches Timothy's videos religiously. When he saw Timothy was speaking, he insisted I come." She paused. "Your husband is remarkable. You must be very proud." "I am," Elizabeth said, and meant it completely. On the drive home, Timothy was quiet. Elizabeth glanced over at him. "That was incredible. You were incredible. Thanks for coming." Timothy kept his eyes on the road. "I wasn't sure if you'd actually show up." The honesty hurt, but Elizabeth accepted it. "I'm here now. I know that doesn't erase everything that came before, but I'm here. I know." Timothy's voice was soft, and it matters. That evening, they cooked dinner together. Timothy taught Elizabeth how to make his grandmother's smothered chicken, walking her through each step with patience. They moved around the kitchen, passing ingredients, tasting, adjusting seasonings. It felt domestic in the best way, simple, connected. Over dinner, Elizabeth's phone buzzed repeatedly. Work emails, weekend crisis. That probably wasn't actually a crisis. She looked at it, felt the familiar pull of obligation, then made a choice. She turned the phone face down. "Not important?" Timothy asked. "Not more important than this." Another week passed. Elizabeth started blocking out lunch on her calendar, coming home to eat with Timothy when he was available. She moved her morning calls to later in the day so they could have breakfast together. Small changes, but consistent ones. Timothy noticed. He didn't comment much, but she could see him watching her, evaluating whether this was temporary or permanent. One evening, they were lying in bed, both reading. Timothy had his laptop reviewing comments on his latest video. Elizabeth had a report she'd been trying to focus on for 20 minutes. She set it aside. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Timothy looked up. "Sure. That day you thought about leaving, what stopped you?" "Really?" He closed his laptop. "Honestly, inertia, partly fear, the unknown, but mostly," he met her eyes. "I kept thinking about the woman I married, the one who asked real questions and listened to answers, the one who saw me. I kept hoping she'd come back." "She did come back," Elizabeth said quietly, "or I'm trying to. I'm probably going to mess up, fall into old patterns, get too focused on work." "Probably," Timothy agreed, "but I don't want to lose this, us not again." Timothy reached over and took her hand. First time he'd initiated physical contact since that afternoon. She'd found his studio. Me neither. They fell asleep that night, holding hands across the space between them, a bridge beginning to form. The turning point came 6 weeks after Elizabeth had walked into that guest room. Timothy was scheduled to film an episode about the Fox Theater's restoration. It was a bigger production than usual, with permission to film in restricted areas, interviews with the preservation team. He'd been preparing for weeks. The night before the shoot, over dinner, he mentioned it casually. "Big day tomorrow, the Fox episode." Elizabeth set down her fork. "What time?" "We're starting at 8:00. Probably filming until 3:00 or so." She pulled out her phone, opened her calendar. She had a board meeting at 9:00, a lunch with potential investors at 12:30, a strategy session at 3:00, important meetings, high-stakes conversations. The kind of day she'd never considered canceling before. She looked at Timothy. "Can I come to the shoot?" "You don't want to?" "I do. I really do." "Elizabeth, you don't have to. I want to understand what you do, not just watch the finished product. I want to see how you work." Timothy looked at her for a long moment. "Okay, yeah, you can come." Elizabeth opened her email and started typing. "Vanessa, I need to move tomorrow's board meeting to Friday. Push the investor lunch to next week. Cancel the 3:00. She hit send before she could second guess us herself. The next morning, they arrived at the Fox Theater together. Elizabeth wore jeans and comfortable shoes, her hair in a ponytail, no makeup. Timothy introduced her to his small crew, Marcus, his videographer, and Chennai's, who handled audio. They were young, clear as throat, talented, clearly devoted to the work. Elizabeth watched Timothy transform into his professional self, directing shots, explaining the historical significance of various architectural elements to the camera, interviewing the theater's preservation director with insightful questions. He was confident, knowledgeable, completely in command. This was his domain, and he moved through it with the assurance of someone who knew exactly who he was and what he was doing. During a break, Marcus approached Elizabeth. "Mrs. Montgomery, can I say something?" "Of course. Timothy is different today." Marcus glanced at where Timothy was reviewing footage with Chennai's, lighter somehow. Usually before big shoots, he's focused but stressed. Today, he seems happy. Elizabeth felt her throat tighten. Maybe he is. "It's good to see," Marcus smiled. "He talks about you sometimes, in the early days he used to mention you in videos. My wife and I visited this building, that kind of thing." Then he stopped. "We all kind of figured, well, but seeing you here today, maybe things are better." "They are," Elizabeth said, "or they're getting there." The shoot wrapped at 4. Timothy's energy was high, clearly pleased with the footage. On the drive home, he talked animatedly about the day, about specific shots he thought worked well, about the preservation director's insights. Elizabeth listened, asked questions, felt grateful to be included in this part of his life. That evening, Timothy uploaded a photo to his Instagram, a shot of the Fox Theater's ornate ceiling with a caption about the upcoming episode. In the comments, someone wrote, "Is that your wife in the background of your story? Good to see the fam supporting." Timothy showed Elizabeth the comment. "Want me to delete it?" he asked. "Why would you?" "I don't know, privacy. You might not want to be associated with I want to be associated with you, Timothy," Elizabeth said firmly. "I'm proud of you. I want people to know that." He looked at her, something shifting in his expression. "Okay." 2 months after Elizabeth had discovered Timothy's studio, they were lying in bed on a Sunday morning. No alarms, no schedules, just soft morning light and the rare luxury of nowhere to be. Timothy had his arm around her, her head resting on his chest. They'd slowly closed the physical distance between them, touched by careful touch, rebuilding intimacy with patience. "I love you," Elizabeth said quietly. "I don't think I've said that in a long time. Not really meant it, but I do. I love you." Timothy's arm tightened around her. "I love you too. Even when I was planning to leave, I loved you. I just didn't know if love was enough." "Is it enough?" "I think so. If we choose it every day, if we keep seeing each other." Elizabeth tilted her head to look at him. "I see you." Finally, and I'm not going to stop looking, they stayed in bed for another hour talking about everything and nothing. About Timothy's upcoming projects, about Elizabeth's work, about maybe taking a vacation, something they hadn't done in 4 years, about the future, uncertain but no longer separate. Later that afternoon, they were in the garden together. Timothy was showing Elizabeth which roses needed pruning, teaching her about the care they required. Her phone rang, a client calling about a weekend crisis. Elizabeth looked at the screen, looked at Timothy, then declined the call and turned off her phone. "Everything okay?" Timothy asked. "Perfect," she said. "Right now, everything's perfect." That evening, Timothy posted his Fox Theater episode. Elizabeth watched it with him on the couch, curled against his side. When it was over, she said, "You make me see the city differently, make me see everything differently." "That's what I do," he said with a smile. "No." Elizabeth turned to face him. "You make me see you, and through you, I see myself more clearly, too." 3 months later, Elizabeth made a decision that would have been unthinkable before. She brought in a co-CEO from Montgomery Financial, someone she'd been mentoring for years. She didn't step down, didn't abandon her career, but she created space. Space for lunches at home, for attending Timothy's speaking engagements, for being present in her marriage without sacrificing her professional identity. Timothy's channel crossed 600,000 subscribers. He signed a development deal with a streaming service for a documentary series about Southern architecture. Elizabeth was there when he got the call, watched his face light up, was the first person he told. They started a tradition. Sunday evenings, no work, no phones. Just dinner together and conversation, real conversation about dreams and disappointments, about what they were learning, about who they were becoming individually and together. One Sunday, nearly 6 months after that lunchtime when everything changed, Elizabeth raised her wine glass. "To second chances," she said. Timothy clinked his glass against hers. "To being seen." They drank, and in the comfortable silence that followed, Elizabeth thought about all the years she'd wasted not truly seeing the man sitting across from her. All the moments she'd missed because she'd been too focused on her own reflection to notice his. But she also thought about the fact that they'd found their way back, that discovering his studio hadn't ended their marriage, but saved it. Sometimes she realized the greatest gift isn't discovering something new. It's rediscovering what was always there, waiting to be seen. The moral lesson. This story isn't just about a wife discovering her husband's secret success. It's about something far more fundamental. The quiet ways we lose each other in relationships and the courage it takes to find our way back. Elizabeth and Timothy's story is a mirror for many modern marriages. We live in a world that celebrates achievement, ambition, and individual success above nearly everything else. We're taught to climb ladders, break ceilings, improve our worth through titles and salaries and public recognition. These aren't inherently wrong pursuits, but they become dangerous when they are the only pursuits. When we sacrifice connection for accomplishment, when we reduce the people we love to supporting roles in our personal narratives of success. The first lesson here is about visibility. Timothy didn't become invisible because he disappeared. He became invisible because Elizabeth stopped looking. This happens in countless relationships. One partner's achievements overshadow the other's contributions. One person's definition clears throat of success becomes the only definition that matters. Slowly, imperceptibly, we stop seeing our partners as whole people with their own dreams, struggles, and identities. They become functionaries in our lives. The person who handles logistics, who provides stability, who makes our ambitions possible. We forget they have ambitions too. The second lesson is about worth. Our culture equates worth with earning power, with visibility, with conventional markers of success. Timothy stepped back from traditional practice to support Elizabeth's career, and in doing so became less than in her eyes. She didn't consciously decide he was worth less, but her actions communicated it clearly. The way she spoke to him, the way she dismissed his presence at her event, the way she stopped asking about his day, his thoughts, his life. She'd internalized the toxic belief that the person earning more, achieving more publicly, matters more, until she discovered Timothy had been achieving all along, just in ways she hadn't bothered to notice. The third lesson is about pride and humility. Elizabeth's transformation required profound humility. She had to confront the fact that she'd been wrong, not just about Timothy's capabilities, but about what constituted a meaningful life. She had to acknowledge that her definition of success was narrow, that her treatment of her husband was inexcusable, that her priorities had been fundamentally skewed. This kind of reckoning is painful. It's easier to justify our behavior, to blame circumstances, to insist we were too busy or stressed to notice. Real change requires us to sit in the discomfort of our failures and choose differently. The fourth lesson is about presence. Elizabeth's journey wasn't about grand gestures. It was about consistent daily choices to be present, to make coffee the way Timothy liked it, to come home for lunch, to turn off her phone during dinner, to attend his speaking engagements, to ask questions, and actually listen to the answers. Rebuilding a relationship doesn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happens in 1,000 small moments where we choose connection over convenience, attention over achievement. The fifth lesson is about mutuality and relationships. Healthy partnerships require both people to see and be seen, to support and be supported, to celebrate and be celebrated. Timothy had been doing all the supporting, all the accommodating, all the invisible labor that made Elizabeth's life possible. Meanwhile, she reaped the rewards and took the credit. This imbalance is unsustainable. Eventually, the person giving everything has nothing left to give. Timothy was months away from leaving, not because he stopped loving Elizabeth, but because he couldn't keep loving someone who refused to love him back in equal measure. The sixth lesson is about the courage of honesty. Timothy didn't hide his studio out of deception. He hid it because he tried to share his interests and been met with dismissal because he'd learned his wife wasn't interested in his inner life. When Elizabeth finally saw his work, he told her the truth, that he'd been planning to leave, that he'd felt invisible for years, that he didn't know if her sudden attention was real or temporary, This honesty was a gift. It gave Elizabeth the information she needed to understand the depth of the damage and the work required to heal it. Without that honesty, they couldn't have rebuilt. The seventh lesson is about redefining success. By the end of the story, Elizabeth hasn't abandoned her career. She's still accomplished, still successful by conventional measures, but she's redefined what success means. It's not just about deals closed and profits made. It's about coming home to someone who knows her and is known by her. It's about building a life, not just a resume. It's about measuring achievement not just in dollars and promotions, but in the quality of her relationships, the depth of her connections, the wholeness of her existence. This story matters because so many of us are living some version of it. Maybe you're the high-achieving partner who stopped seeing the person making your life possible. Maybe you're the partner who's become invisible, building a life in the margins while waiting to be noticed. Maybe you're somewhere in between, feeling the slow drift of disconnection and not knowing how to stop it. The truth is this: ambition and connection don't have to be opposites. You can be successful in your career and successful in your relationships, but it requires intentionality. It requires choosing to see your partner fully, to value their contributions whether or not they come with a paycheck, to make space in your life for presence and not just productivity. It requires humility to admit when you've been wrong and courage to change. It requires the daily discipline of small choices that communicate. You matter to me, your dreams matter, your life matters, not just how it serves mine, but in its own right. If you recognize yourself in this story, whether as Elizabeth or Timothy, know that change is possible. It's not easy. It requires consistent effort, honest conversation, and genuine transformation. But relationships can be rebuilt. People can be resilient for having weathered the storm of neglect and near loss. The final lesson is perhaps the most important. Don't wait for a crisis to wake up to what you have. Elizabeth was lucky. She came home at exactly the right moment, discovered Timothy's hidden world in time to fight for their marriage. But what if she'd come home 2 months later after he'd already left? What if she'd never walked into that room? Some people don't get second chances. Some marriages end not with a bang, but with a whimper. Two people realizing too late that they've become strangers sharing an address. Look at your partner today. Really ask yourself, when was the last time you truly saw them? When did you last ask about their dreams, their struggles, their inner life? When did you last express genuine appreciation not for what they do for you, but for who they are? If you can't remember, start now before it's too late, before the distance becomes unbridgeable, before the person you took for granted decides they deserve to be seen and seeks that visibility elsewhere. Elizabeth and Timothy's story ends with hope because they both chose to fight for their marriage. But the story could have ended very differently. Let it be a warning and an inspiration. Your relationships are only as strong as the attention you give them. The people you love are only as visible as you choose to see them. Don't let success in one area of life blind you to failure in another. Don't mistake achievement for wholeness. And don't ever take for granted that the person beside you will wait forever to be noticed. See them, choose them, love them. Not someday,